So we'll now pass to Dave. Thank you so much for your patience, Dave. Thank you.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks, Heidi, and thanks for locating us, Joan. And this is a great room. I thought that might be like, 2 minutes, 120 seconds of excruciating. And it was quite the contrary. My name's Dave Sweeney. I work with ACF. I was also one of the co-founders of ICAN, and I've been involved in nuclear politics for quite a long time. Can I just check, small group here, but can I just check, is line of sight good, sufficient enough you want me to stand, or is it okay like this, and is sound okay? Both, thumbs up for both. Great. Okay, thanks. Oh, sorry. ICAN is the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, an Australian initiative which has gone global and formed in 2007. In 2017, got a treaty through the United Nations, which entered into force in 2021. 2017, ICAN got the Nobel Peace Prize for that treaty. And the treaty... Group effort, very group effort. And the treaty entered into force in 2021, and now for the first time in international humanitarian law, nuclear weapons are illegal. So it is the start of changing how we talk about this, and it's more than just virtue signaling or all those things that the critics and the underminers say. We've turned off $400 billion in pension funds and superannuation funds going into nuclear weapons companies. So these things are real world impacts, and we want to save our real world because there's no joy in the rubble. So that's that one, but I wanted to also acknowledge that we're on the lands of the Kulin Nation, and it's really important to acknowledge, not just because it's the right thing to do in a country where that's unfinished business, but also because First Nations people have been at the forefront of impact and the forefront of resistance to nuclear industry, be that nuclear weapons testing or uranium mining or radioactive waste dump proposals, the forefront of impact and the forefront of resistance. So we've got lots that we can learn. I also want to acknowledge the lineage of others, self-included, on this day, and wish you all a gentle and happy St. Porrig's Day. Happy Paddy's to you. And it's a timely reminder, St. Patrick does, that we have an opportunity and obligation to dislodge a few political vipers along the way, change some of those snakes out of here. Now, speaking of strange behaviours, the Coalition's nuclear threat, the nuclear push. I work with ACF. We are a significant national environment group, and one of our core pieces of work is climate. There is a vast urgency, this room knows, to address climate change. So we look at this and we look at the whole suite of ways we do this, and we've just said nuclear is simply, utterly inappropriate. We've got two main concerns about the Coalition's nuclear plan. The first is the risk of nuclear. There's a whole range of often unique and often intergenerational particular concerns about nuclear that doesn't exist with any other energy source. Long-lived radioactive waste, high levels of insecurity, high levels of implication for reduction in civil liberties, public health impacts, long-lived radiation impacts, cost, safety. We just, a week ago, we're at the 14th anniversary of Fukushima. A group that I was involved in put out a series of plume maps, nuclearplume.au, which mapped the formal Fukushima data over the 7 sites the Coalition said. And it's chilling to see how many people would live under that cloud, that potential cloud. So there's the nuclear concerns about the proposal, but there's also another concern, which is that about delay, disruption, derailing of renewables, our pathway forward, our way for a cleaner future. And the nuclear stuff mightn't happen, but the delay, disruption and derailing of renewables will under this proposal. It's not, I think it's really important to note this, it's not an unintended consequence, it is a key driver of their intention. The LNP may never pour concrete, and a bunch of them wouldn't miss a night's sleep over that, but they will pour cold water on renewable funding. As we know, money dislikes uncertainty, and they are seeking to inject uncertainty into our nation's energy policy future. So it's the latest iteration of Australia's long-running and deeply non-productive climate and energy culture wars, and this time it's a culture war writ large in glow-in-the-dark script. So last June, Peter Dutton got up with 4 or 5 others and released amidst much fanfare the nuclear plan or policy. Since then there's been lots of headlines but very little fine print. We've seen very little about whole of life costings, about the timeframes, about where the water would come from and where the waste would go, about the implications for Australia's growing renewable industry and employment, particularly in regional Australia, about the implications on prices and on rooftop solar, on what is planned to fill the electricity shortfall between the certain closure of coal and the very uncertain opening of nuclear. So there's a whole, without getting too Donald Rumsfeld about it, there's a whole lot of unknowns in this mix. And we can't allow the alternative government to go to an election saying this is a keynote piece of policy and have that poverty of detail. Now, the coalition says that nuclear is the way forward, that if Australia doesn't catch that bus, that we are in profound danger of missing out. So really, let's just have one little snapshot of this. Nuclear share of global electricity today is 9% and declining. Over 70% of global nuclear capacity, 70% of all nuclear in the world is in 5 nations. The US, France, China, Russia and South Korea. Now they're important nations, but there's 5 nations are 70% of the world's nuclear. The number of nations using nuclear in 2025 is the same as the number of nations in 1995. The sector is flatlining. The average age of the global nuclear fleet is 32 years. The sector is ageing. This century, the cost of nuclear has grown by 50%. The build times in the 4 Western nations that have built nuclear reactors this century, that's Finland and France, the UK and the US, all of them are blown out. Costs are blown out, timelines are blown out, and the reactor units have costs between 20 and 45 billion Australian dollars per unit. At the same time, if you look at global renewables, the International Energy Agency has renewable energy providing and powering 40% of global electricity by 2030. And that deployment is growing. In 2024, last year, there were 4 gigawatts of new nuclear electricity added globally, and that is compared to more than 660 gigawatts of global renewable sourced energy. So that's 155 times more renewable electricity into global poles and wires last year than nuclear. And the mega dollars are following the megawatts. In 2024, Bloomberg analysis showed that investment in renewables was over 20 times that of nuclear. And while the nuclear costs are soaring, up 50%, renewables are falling. This century, wind is down by over 60% and solar fallen by more than 80%. And people say, well, what about China? China nuclear is going in China. And it is. China is building everything. There were 4 gigawatts of nuclear injected into the system last year. 3.5 of those gigawatts were from China. But in the same year, China added 356 gigawatts of renewables. So 100 times, more than 100 times more renewables than nuclear in China. So basically, you could go on for a long time, I won't. But the picture is pretty clear. Globally, nuclear has plateaued. It's peaked, it's plateaued, and it's in steady constraint and steady decline. Whereas everywhere renewables are growing, except in cost, where they're tumbling. And the same's true in Australia. Not 1 watt of energy from nuclear in Australia, but 45% of Australia today is powered by renewables. 75% is SA, 100% down in Tassie or up in the ACT. That's today, and that's growing. Now, the best thing about the nuclear debate is it accepts that the era of coal is over, and it is. Coal, 90% gone by 2035, all of it gone, slated to be gone by 2040. That's an important set of discussions. But the worst thing about this nuclear debate is that against the advice, against the evidence, we are coming up to a T-junction and we could take a very bad path. And it is against the advice and the evidence, and it's also against the law. The Howard government in the late 1990s had 2 pieces of legislation which prohibited domestic nuclear power. That legislation is echoed in the entire east coast, eastern seaboard, and there's policy or legal bans in most jurisdictions in Australia. These are long-standing, prudent, and generally bipartisan. So nuclear has failed the political test. With the exception of South Australia and the ACT, LNP leaders, conservative political leaders in all states, whether they lead it, like David Crisafulli in Queensland, or whether they're in opposition, like they will be for a considerable period of time, you'd imagine, in WA, have said no to nuclear. ACT and South Australia and Peter Dutton. Everyone else is opposed. It's failed the political test. It's failed the market test. The electricity investors, generators, transmitters, retailers, they don't want it. And they've been explicit like AGL. And in return, we have the party of Menzies, the party of the free market, threatening compulsory acquisition and introducing a nationalised electricity system that the market's turned its back on. And it's failed the expert test. CSIRO, for the past 7 years, has modelled nuclear as the slowest and the most expensive of the new electricity energy options. AEMO says it's high cost and high cost and too slow. AEMO is the Australian Energy Market Operator. And it's also said that even if it was advanced, the federal coalition's approach would see less power than is prudent for their projections for Australia in 2050. These concerns have been amplified by groups such as the Australian Academy of Technical Sciences, the former Chief Scientist Alan Finkel, and so many more. Now this isn't Greenpeace, ACF and Friends of the Earth. This is sort of heavy-hitting, big end of town. And I've been involved in lots of nuclear contests, discussions, debates, campaigns. I don't think I've ever been involved in one where there is such alignment from the forces and voices of capital and forces and voices critical of capital as in this domestic nuclear power discussion. People are saying it just doesn't make any sense, and it just doesn't. So what's driving it then? And basically it's a combination, as most things generally are, of a few factors. In my sense, being on a couch, I'll do the insiders thing. In my sense, it's a combination of the search for a domestic political wedge. It's very much fossil fuel business as usual. It's a culture war stoush. And above all, it is hostility to renewables. Hostility that is bloody-minded and deeply irresponsible to advancing urgent action that we so desperately need on climate. Now, I'm the world's best fan of Matt Canavan, Queensland member, senator, who drove around Queensland when the world was mourning George Floyd in a Hilux with painted on the side, "Black Coal Matters." I'm not Matt's biggest fan, but I'll tell you one thing, he calls it pretty straight. And before Christmas, he was on ABC radio and he said, nuclear ain't cheap. He said, it's not going to work. We're not serious about it. We've embraced it because it provides a political fix for us. He belled the atomic cat. So nuclear is basically a fig leaf for climate inaction, the capping and scrapping of renewables, and the extending of coal and the cementing of gas. It's not a good faith attempt by an alternative government to address a complex and urgent set of policy considerations. It is not that. The coalition has a very negative energy agenda and overt hostility to renewable energy and to energy transition. They are committed to scrapping 3 of the 5 offshore wind zones. They have said they will cap renewable share of Australia's energy market at 54%. We're currently at 45. Smart Energy Council, who are smart and deal with energy, say that we'll be at 54 in July next year. So early in the first term of a Dutton LNP government, we would put a brick on the head of the fastest growing sector in the world that is our ticket out of climate chaos and our ticket into secure, low carbon, Geiger counter off energy, particularly in regional Australia. That is economic vandalism writ large. It's a serious threat at a critical time. Now, if the world ran on logic and common sense and enlightened self-interest, this would be not an issue. And I speak to many people who go, I cannot believe we are having this debate. But we know that the world doesn't run on those things. We know that economic rationalism isn't always rational. We know that emotion can literally trump evidence. And we know that algorithms can defeat analysis. And we know that there's groups like Advance, cashed up, unaccountable, about to unleash a social media frenzy about nuclear. So I think we all have a critical role. And this is a really important room. Like Heidi said, in the circles that you mix in, you're significant influencers of opinion. People listen to you and you shape ideas. That's a powerful role. And it's a time now, as a good friend of mine said, that we all need to be anti-nuclear activists ahead of this next election so that then we can get on with the real business of developing a meaningful and effective energy policy into the future. And I'll just close on just a couple of quick observations. A couple of things I find always odd about pro-nuclear, like not really rusted on, not people who are questioning in good faith, is it appropriate? But those really rusted on crew. They believe that we can't make a battery that can hold a charge for a week, but they believe we can make a barrel that can hold a carcinogenic waste for 100,000 years. That's a disjunct that I've never understood. Another one that I've never understood is they belittle solar. Many of them belittle solar without seeming to understand the sun is the source of life on Earth and that it's approved, licensed, well-sited, has a waste management strategy, and it's a nuclear reactor. So I'm not hostile to celestial nuclear, very hostile to terrestrial nuclear. And my final observation would be that the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. And the nuclear age won't end because we forget about nuclear technology. But it will end, and it will end by not starting in this country because we make a conscious choice that is safer, smarter, more deployable, quicker and cleaner. And we're all part of that choice, and I look forward to working with you to make it. Thanks very much.
Authorised by Heidi Lee Douglas for Solar Citizens, Sydney.